of agroecology works. So the tools that we're discussing today are these two tools, the Agroecology Criteria Tool Act, or BACT, Business Agroecology Criteria Tool, developed by Biovision, and then the Tool for Agroecology Performance Evaluation, or TAPE, from FAO. And these are the speakers who will talk and introduce both the tools and then also the specific applications or uses of the tools that have been made. So, and we'll start with Madeleine Kaufmann, policy advisor at FOAC, and she's in international affairs and food systems, and she will really give us a keynote, more introducing the topic and the relevance of these questions more generally. This will be followed by Lutz Merbold, who is head of strategic research division and agroecology environment at Agroscope. Lutz will be focusing a lot on the TAPE tool and also share with us latest developments and insights from his research team on this. Then we have Stefanie Pondini and Samira Amos. They are both working at Biovision. Stefanie is co-head of policy and advocacy at Biovision, and Samira is a project manager of food policy here at Biovision. And they are presenting the BACT tool and applications of the BACT tool. And then I'm also very happy to have Eliane Steiner here with us from SWISSAID. She's program manager and somehow presenting together with Sarah Mader, also from SWISSAID, who's thematic advisor on agroecology. Unfortunately, Sarah can't be with us online today, but Eliane will speak for both of them. So a big thanks to all the speakers and for your readiness to be here and share with us your knowledge and your insights. So here's the agenda of the day. And like you can see, I'm already running 2 minutes behind schedule. So to say that we really have a tight schedule and we have a lot of inputs, as I just said already before. We'll have some short moments for questions of clarifications directly after the input by Lutz Merbold. And then a bit more time for questions, and then really also a discussion towards the end at 3:20. I would really like to encourage you to bring your questions to the to this virtual round once we have that moment by virtually raising your hand. Of course, you can also use the chat to ask questions, and we will try to keep a track of this. But as far as possible, let's try to use the virtual hand and really have a discussion when we have the moment for the discussion. All right, so with this, I think we are through the introduction. And I'm already handing over to Madeleine Kaufmann, and we're much looking forward to your words on setting the scene, Madeleine. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind presentation, Johanna, and thank you to Biovision and SWISSAID for the invitation and the possibility to set the scene. And thanks also to Agroecology Works, who once again put together a very rich ones to make agroecology lively and to show what it is in Switzerland and abroad. Thank you very much. So to start, I would like to share some personal experiences on the perception and understanding of agroecology, which in my view is like the precondition to implement agroecology and to talk about its measurements like we want to do in this event today. So I represent Switzerland's position on agroecology at the international level, be it in the Agroecology Coalition, the Committee on World Food Security, or at FAO. And I'm also looking at how the agroecological approach can be implemented in our Swiss national agriculture policy. In all these processes, again and again, I experienced that many people still do not understand what agroecology is and what is meant by it. Maybe not within the circle of agroecological advocates like us who are present today here in this event, I assume, but outside. And I would like to mention 2 examples. I recently exchanged views with my US colleague from the Department of Agriculture. He emphasized that he sees agroecology tantamount to regressing to traditional farming practices and as trade restrictive. Does agroecology really stands for backward agriculture and completely rejecting trade? A second example. In 2020, I was leading an inclusive process with several FOAG unit heads with the aim to see how agroecological our Swiss agriculture policy is. The project lasted 9 months. I just heard the other day two of them saying in the coffee break that they still do not understand what agroecology is. What makes agroecology so difficult to understand and apply? Ladies and gentlemen, how can we translate agroecology from abstract principles to tangible results, like Johanna said in her introduction? And what does a farm and an enterprise look like that is aligned with the agroecological principles? This is the big challenge. And here lies the key to success, I believe. Next slide, please. So at the risk of presenting something that many of you already know, I would like to briefly outline in my keynote two things. So first, the emergence of the characterization of agroecology at multilateral level. And second, how the Federal Council sees agroecology and how we at the Swiss Federal Office for Agriculture implement it. Next slide, please. So as you know, there is no standardized definition, but various characterizations of agroecology. The concept is guided by social, cultural, political, economic, and ecological principles. So it's all about the application of general principles to the local context. And multilaterally, there exist two characterizations of agroecology, which were published/adopted almost at the same time in 2019. On the one hand, the 13 agroecological principles, which were published in the high-level panel of experts report that you can see here on this slide on agroecological and other innovative approaches. The HLPE, the scientific body of the Committee on World Food Security, proposed with and other innovative approaches a more balanced approach, which should have a better chance, let's say, for the elaboration of the policy recommendations that the CFS developed in 2020, with some limited success, I would say. Switzerland engaged intensively in the negotiations and advocated for ambitious policy recommendations. We were quite in a minority doing so, and there was a great polarization around the concept of agroecology in these negotiations. This was particularly the case between heavily export-oriented countries who fear that agroecology means a restriction to their exports and a return to traditional farming practices, and other member states who really urged to enhance ecological sustainability in their agriculture policies like Switzerland did. So geopolitics at its best and agroecology right in the middle. Next slide, please. So on the other hand, the 10 elements of agroecology by FAO, which were adopted by the FAO Council in December 2019. At that time, the Rome-based agencies and above all FAO introduced the term agroecology to offer a concept that reconciled various approaches that could transform food systems and like that offer their member states a way to reach consensus. Comparing or evaluating the two characterizations is not helpful in my view. I understand both characterizations as proposals that seek to make the concept of agroecology easier to understand and put into practice. It is important to mention that the 13 HLPE principles are aligned with the 10 elements of FAO, build on them, and in certain areas expand on them, like for instance with the additional principles of animal and soil health, or also the HLPE differentiates diversity from the 10 elements into biodiversity and economic diversification. The FAO elements, on the other hand, correspond to what we call multilaterally agreed language, which can be an advantage depending on the setting you want to use the term agroecology. So to me, what seems much more important than comparing these two approaches is to supplement them with Gliessman's 5 levels to transitioning to agroecological food systems. Next slide, please. So the scientist Gliessman proposes a 5-level system for classifying the transformation of food system based on agroecology. The graph here compares them with the 13 principles on the very right and the 10 elements in the middle of this slide. And I truly experience that this graph helps to explain what agroecology is and how it differs from other approaches like organic or regenerative agriculture. At the first level, this transition pathway focuses on improving resource efficiency with the principal input reduction, for instance. At the second level, alternatives to chemical inputs are looked for with the view to relying more on ecological processes, like with the principal biodiversity, for instance. And whereas level 1 and 2 are incremental, levels 3 to 5 are transformational. Level 3 aims at redesigning the farming system to strengthen its resilience and diversity, and transition levels 4 to 5 really broaden the focus to encompass the whole food system. What I have personally observed is that it is easier for policy, practice, and also research, I assume, to address and implement the agroecological elements / principles of the lower levels, be it through direct payment instruments in the Swiss agriculture policy, for instance, or by farmers. Easier maybe as more directly manageable or measurable, because also happening at farm and field level. Next slide, please. Then I would like to say a word on how our Federal Council sees agroecology and how we at the Swiss Federal Office for Agriculture are implementing it. The Federal Council sees agroecology as one approach to achieve the transformation to more sustainable food system, and stated this in various postulates and interpellations. I have give you the links at the very end of my presentation. And with Article 104A, food security, the agroecological approach is anchored in our federal constitution, so to speak. The Federal Council has advocated the agroecological approach on both international and national level. I still believe he can do more. At international level, as president of the Swiss Confederation, Guy Parmelin announced Switzerland's entry into the agroecology coalition at the UN Food Systems Summit 2 years ago. Switzerland supports this coalition financially and is member of its steering group and working groups. Then looking at the national level, one example is that last month, the Federal Offices on Environment, Agriculture and Food Safety and Veterinary Services published a new climate strategy for agriculture and food, about which opinions differ. Some think it has too little flesh on its bones, others think it goes way too far. Fact is that the strategy takes into account the agroecological approach and aims to consider, for example, import facilitation based on agroecological principles. Perhaps the biggest adjustment, however, is that it was decided that the Swiss agriculture policy evolves into a food systems policy, taking up the central element of the agroecological approach, so to speak, a systemic and integrated food systems lens. As a result, and this is something I also would like to share with you, we are currently having many discussions in-house about how certain direct payment instruments, such as sales promotion or grants for innovative projects like KUNAF, can be expanded or further developed to have a holistic effect on the entire food system. All of these discussions stand or fall on the question of how to measure the transformation of food systems and what indicators exist to do so. no progress in policy making without appropriate tools and indicator. Next slide, please. To conclude, I would like to present you some ideas on how agroecology may be used for policy making and in practice. We believe that agroecology can serve as process to monitor the change from a purely production-oriented agriculture policy to a food systems policy. So the principles, they accompanied us at FAOG also to do this shift now. It can serve as a systemic approach in order to keep track of the evaluation and development of the entire food systems and its complex interdependencies. And agroecology can also be an instrument to promote dialogue, like I said in the beginning with the project we did, to strengthen collective learning, an important aspect in policy making. And it can serve as an approach to highlight synergies and trade-offs to ensure the most coherent possible development of food systems and nutrition policies. And in that sense, agroecology can offer, and you can shift to the last slide, can offer a compass for the food systems transformation journey, but only if we can make tangible what agroecology is, only if we can show how the implementation works at farm or company level. And for this, the approach must be measurable. We need tools and we need indicators. And with that, I'm very pleased to hand over now the floor to Lutz Merbold, Stefanie Pondini, Samira Amos, and Elian Steiner, which have tried their hands at this measurement, indicator development, and implementation. Thank you very much, and the floor back to you, Johanna.
Thank you so much, Madeleine, for this fascinating introduction and really emphasizing again why it is so crucial that we are talking about these measurements and indicators. So without any further ado, I would like to pass over to the words to Lutz Merbold. Also, just to remind you all that we are really tight on time. So I am aware that it's hard to speak. We, as organizers, we challenged everybody. We gave them super little time to speak. But please, otherwise I will also try to remind that we're getting towards the time limit. Thank you a lot, and thanks Lutz now for introducing us to TAPE and the uses and applications and further developments on the TAPE tool.
Welcome everyone. Can you just quickly confirm that you can hear me?
Yeah, I could hear you. It was a little bit
okay.
Yeah,
okay, perfect. Okay, so welcome everybody to this webinar, and thank you, Madeleine, for actually giving this amazing introduction. It's also my pleasure to present our work on TAPE, the tool for agroecological performance evaluation, here today. And of course, I'm also not doing this just by myself, but I have to credit my co-authors, which is the core team when we started the project. But there have been a lot of people joining this endeavor now, and I'm probably coming back to those as well, but some of them you see actually here. So what am I going to tell you in the next 16 to 20 minutes, which is roughly what is TAPE and which results are already available. And I'm just focusing on Switzerland, but also a bit global at the beginning. And then we're going a little bit more in depth, which comes then from the science side of things, because I want to look into the biodiversity indicator, which is currently part of TAPE, and how can we potentially improve that, how we did improve that, and how well it performs by now, but also maybe a couple of suggestions on how to make TAPE even better than it is already, because in the end, it should really give the necessary information and make agroecology accessible to everyone, to the wider public, by providing actual numbers.
Lutz? I am not sure if we just lost him. But I'm not, yeah, I'm not in seeing Lutz, so I fear. Okay. We were just about to reorganize, but I think Lutz is rejoining us. So yes, here he is. We cannot hear you yet.
Sorry, yes, sorry for that. I don't know what happened. Now you should hear me.
Now we can hear you.
Samir,
Yeah.
can you actually share? I think that's better. Samir is going to share.
She's getting ready to share. Mm-hmm.
That's this government network right now. That's interesting.
Sorry, 1 second.
Johanna, can you tell me when I dropped out, please?
Good question. I was answering to somebody in the chat. I'm sorry. But yeah, you were here just introducing what you were going to talk about and why you talk about the further development of the tape. I mean, the biodiversity indicator.
Okay, cool. Next slide, please. All right, so now coming back to what Madeleine already said and it's a good reminder. So these 10 elements of agroecology provided by FAO, they allow to do a sustainability assessment of the agriculture food system in a very holistic way. And if you click, please, twice. One more time, please. So we have to go for that. Okay. And it's based on a range of indicators. One back, please. And it's based on a range of indicators which tackle the typical 3 dimensions of sustainability: ecology, social dimensions, and economics. The good thing is that basically, as Madeleine has said, the UN countries have agreed on sort of a minimum in these indicators. But the good thing is modular, and if you have something better at a national scale, you can actually complement the tape tool with something better for specific dimensions. And that's good. So next one. And just to confirm on what Madeleine also said, I mean, there is different sort of approaches, the 10 elements or the 13 principles, but that figure really, really nicely highlights on how the individual, no matter if you talk about elements or principles, actually contribute to tracking the transformation of the agricultural food systems via these different levels. And of course, the different elements, you see them here in the middle, are actually addressing these different levels. And only if you achieve all 10 of them, then you also achieve the level 5 of rebuilding the global food system, which is definitely quite a big challenge. If you could click, please. One more time. And once more. So where are we in Switzerland? And this is actually the tricky question to do. I would love to give you exact numbers for Switzerland already, but we're only having a small sample size at the moment. However, the good thing is we just got approval for a new research project, which will start next year, funded by FOAC and a couple of others, where we really look into this and really trying to assess where Switzerland is standing in terms of the agroecological status. We really want to put numbers on that and which of these elements are performing at which level. And that is going to run for a couple of years, but finally we will have the scientific evidence to inform the public, but also to inform policymakers with that. And if you could click further, please. One more. So now let's go into more detail on TAPE itself. It's a survey-based tool, and it has different steps. Some of the things you can actually do already in advance. Step 0, which sort of describes your current system you're having, your production systems, the type of households, agroecological zones, etc., and what is the enabling environment. And the actual survey itself then starts with a step 1 and step 2. And it really gives you the first step is these basic elemental sort of questions, which give you the characterization of agroecological transition, a CATE score, and I will come back to that. So it can go from 0 to 100, and the further you're up, the better you are within your transformation already. Some of the things is probably data you can derive, especially in Switzerland, already beforehand, before you actually do a household survey. However, when you then come to the step 2, where you really dive into specific dimensions of each individual indicator, and I will go and show you some results in a minute. Main thing is, the idea is to keep it relatively simple and directly approachable so that you can actually talk to farmers. So you start at the household or farm level, and then you can aggregate that to regional or even country level. And in the third step, this is then the whole analysis going back on how can this actually influence policies, how can countries report or contribute with the agroecological transformation to sustainability goals or sustainable development goals, etc., etc. So, next one, please. Where we're standing with tape so far, and this is actually slides I received from FAO recently. It's currently sort of rolled out or has been tested on more than 5,000 farms globally in more than 40 countries already. And the colors indicate sort of the piloting phase, which started in 2019. Things were a little bit delayed due to the COVID pandemic. That's the reason why there's some of the projects are still running or haven't been finalized that. Some have been actually funded by multilateral organizations or funding or bodies. This is here shown in blue. Then there's also several NGOs that use tape already. I've been discussing also with SWISSAID recently. And then there's also the yellow countries, and this is where we come in, and other organizations, where we really try to make that system as good as it is already, and it covers a lot of things, it's simple. Can we still sort of make it better and applicable to a wider range of things? If you go further. And I'm happy to share also some results on behalf of the colleagues in FAO. This is now for Sub-Saharan Africa, where they have put all these farm household surveys they had together. In that case, it's a bit more than 3,000 from 9 countries. Some of these are already published on saying, okay, where are we standing? And the bottom 28% you see in this pie chart here is actually those farm households or those farms which are considered as initiating their transition towards agroecological production systems. So they get a CATE score between 40 to 50%, and only a small percentage, those are the 4% on top, basically, which are already very high and above 70%, basically. So we have quite a high range, and the diversity, and the thing is, where are these farms, where individual countries can we cross-compare them, and where are they getting better? So the good thing is you can also use tape to actually track your transformation of the system over time. And one more, please. And since we're looking at sort of integrated assessments, the nice thing is you can look at individual sort of elements. We're looking here at the resilience element and how important, especially in Sub-Saharan Africa, livestock is for these systems. So the higher the CATE score, the more diverse is your livestock you have on your animal diversity on a farm, so animal species. And this also is an indicator for being more resilient to, for instance, environmental changes or climatic extremes, but it also helps the farmers to diversify their incomes and also the capacity to recover after stresses. If you go one further. But it's not just about the ecological dimensions, and this is really the link to more the food system itself. Again, you see at the bottom these CATE scores, so the characterization of ecological transition score, and the ones which are really high up also show a higher dietary diversity score, which means that the products not just produced but also consumed within the household are more diverse, which is also sort of an indirect proxy for more healthy diets in the end and better sustainability. And this is just the global overview, and you can click yes, please. And Samir, if you can show the whole slide, so you probably have to click a few times. I'll say stop when you can stop. Okay, so why biodiversity? The current biodiversity indicator within TAPE focuses on plant agrobiodiversity only. So only how many crop species or animal species you have. And it doesn't take sort of into account the wider landscape scale biodiversity, which is very, very important and goes clearly beyond the farm level. Because biodiversity actually needs to be assessed at a larger scale. And FAO actually reached out to us because we do have a really, really nice Swiss agri-environmental data network, the SWISSAID network, which is sort of covered all of Switzerland with more than 300 farms, and we're observing these systems since 2009. So we have a long-term sort of data set, and we do actually calculate already biodiversity, but specifically unplanned biodiversity. So we're just looking at land scale and not necessarily at individual sort of crop or animal species. And of course, we also wanted to try TAPE in Switzerland, whether that actually works with it, because it was originally developed for low and middle income countries. So the idea of this whole study was, can we advance the current TAPE biodiversity indicator based on our knowledge we have here? Can we then also apply that in a low and middle income country in the global south somewhere? And if you want to hear more about our existing data network, you can read the publication. Next slide, please. Again, you can possibly click a few times. That was planned slightly different. Okay, so the current Swiss agricultural biodiversity indicator is a relatively complex Swiss agricultural life cycle assessment called SALCA-BD. It's a semi-quantitative point system, just very simple. Basically, the more points you get, the better you are. It's based on more than 1,000 scientific peer-reviewed publications on spiders, on beetles, on plant species, etc. And it has a very strong European focus. And we thought about like, oh, can we use that? Probably not, because it's not feasible for TAPE. It's just too complex, takes more time. And very often you do not have that scientific evidence for individual countries and low and middle income countries. So in the end, we looked at, okay, what are the drivers for biodiversity? We know that farm management, pesticide application, fertilizer application, livestock density, etc., all these things. And we thought about, can we include this and still keep it as simple as possible? So if you go to the next, please. Here we go. So you see TAPE step 1, the elements of agroecology on the left side. Then you see the step 2, which sort of goes a bit further. And on level 9, there's agrobiodiversity, which basically is a consistency of 3 components. And then we tried to sort of open this box up and make it, yes, a bit more complex, but also more complementary by still including agrobiodiversity and also landscape scale biodiversity. And the individual drivers, which can easily derive during field service, is what's your field size? What are tree habitats, for instance? How much nitrogen or how much fertilizer you're applying? Your pesticide applications, your field operations, your grazing intensity, and whether there's land use change. And through that, you can actually come to a quantitative system and assess biodiversity more comprehensively than it used to be before. And the results look as follows. If you click on the next slide, please, Samira. You get these typical spider diagrams. Those are those 10 additional sort of these 10 components we have within the new biodiversity indicator. And it really shows you on the further you are out, the better you are, basically. So you have quite a wide range with farms in different locations, etc. For instance, on pesticide application at the bottom, where some farms are better than others, also on field size, etc. If you click again, please. So we tried to differentiate that on our data site for different regions in Switzerland, the valley region, the hill region, and the mountain region. Just consider that the valley region are usually the more intensively managed farms, and the mountain regions are typical grasslands, you know. And again, I would like to focus you just on the pesticide application. Of course, the mountain regions are sort of much better. So they're further down on the spider diagram because there's very little pesticides being applied in these mountain regions. Whereas in other dimensions, there's not such a big difference between the 3 regions. Again, the good thing is we can use that over time and actually track the transition of the system. So it's pretty well functional. Next one, please. We did a very big, quick comparison between the new biodiversity index and the original Swiss biodiversity indicator and found quite a well comparison. We did never expect a 1-to-1 line because the actual focus was quite different. One is just a full biodiversity indicator, and the other one is just on landscape scale. However, it does include all the different management. I think we have a robust tool here. This is now available online for everyone as open access. Samira, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, and now we tested, let's just have 3 more slides. We tested this actually in a low and middle income country, in this case, Kenya, because we had quite strong relations there already. We went to Western Kenya, some of you may know it. It's a highland area with a lot of smallholder farmers. We're talking about 2 counties, and we basically sampled more than 100 farm households there. Can you click please again until you see everything? It's a little bit of an idea of give you what the farms look like. You have some livestock, you have a small water body, you have some biogas production units, but also some cash crops like tea or maize, for instance, being planted. Next one, please. Can't see it yet. Here we go. Of course, we tried to see on whether this indicator actually really worked. On the left side, you see the old tape biodiversity indicator, which showed a very, very strong difference between the 2 counties. Beaumont is a more diversified and intense system, whereas Nandi is just a pure dairy system. And with the new indicator, we still find that, but it's less pronounced. It's still significant. However, I think we're also seeing that we can also address biodiversity more holistically with the new indicator. And we're seeing this diversity difference still at that time. If you go one further, please. And similar to Switzerland, we tried to look at these different regions. We call them here agroecological zones. We were able to stratify our sample across that, and we thought that it would also be a driver of agroecological transformation. However, that was not the case. We didn't see these clear differences we found, for instance, for the Valley Hill and mountain region Switzerland, and we actually have to look into other drivers of the agroecological transformation in Kenya. And we're going to do that in the future. So, which brings me to my last slide, Samira. What we try to show is basically why biodiversity is so important. You see the new biodiversity indicator here on the left side, and the Kate score again. So the better you are on your agroecological transformation, there's also a clear definition of higher biodiversity, both agrobiodiversity, but also landscape biodiversity. And we really would like to encourage everyone to use the new indicator because it really sort of improves our systems understanding and is freely available on GitHub. Now, the approach is still simple and straightforward, as I mentioned before. However, we are currently working with FAO together to make tape even better than it is, because some of the environmental indicators in there, soil health, probably needs some further development as well. And we would like to expand tape to climate because this is something which is currently not included, and we're currently working on that. And I hope with that I could sort of, even for the troubles with the presentation, show you a little bit more on what tape is about and what it is useful for. And I'm very, very happy to answer questions. And thank you to FAO for funding that project.
Thank you so much, Lutz, for sharing the insights. Also sorry for the connection. I think there was a slight time change between what you could see and what everybody else was seeing. So despite the challenges, thanks a lot. And I think it was super valuable also to see not only what the tape tool is and how it works and where it has been applied, but also really how specific indicators are further developed. I appreciate that this is a crucial and in-depth work that many people and research teams are working on. Meanwhile, other organizations and people are already using the tools to measure their projects or portfolios. So it's super important to see how all of this evolves simultaneously and building upon each other. Thanks a lot. With this, usually we would have had time for questions and answers, but really questions of understanding to Lutz, because we are running a little bit late. I would suggest that we move straight on to the presentation by Stephanie Pondini and Samira Amos on the ACT and BACT tool. But please do keep your questions of understanding for every presenter until the end. And of course, also larger points of discussion. We'd also really like to have a discussion at the end. With this, I hand over to Stephanie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johanna. I hope you can hear me. Yes, great. So Samira and I are very excited to shortly present to you our newest tool, the Business Agroecology Criteria tool, which is based on the ACT that Elian is introducing or talking about in a couple of minutes. Next slide, please, Samira. So what is the BACT for? What is the goal of the BACT? So the BACT tool is actually assessing how their operations of an enterprise are aligned with the 13 agroecological principles. So yes, and we really need to make clear here, it measures the intention of an enterprise and not the impact. So it's not an impact measurement tool, it measures the intention. So what is written in the business plans, in the mission statement, vision statement, in the activities they are planning to do. But we are not going and check on the ground after a couple of years what then really happened. And why did we come up with this tool? Why did we feel it's important to develop after the ACT now the BACT? Because we hear a lot about the private sector, the role that the private sector should play in the food systems transformation, especially the big corporations. So it's always the discussion, okay, how can we involve them more? How can we make them more sustainable? But mostly the small and medium-sized enterprises are not really in the focus of these discussions. But there are thousands and thousands of these smaller enterprises around the world that are actually operating very sustainable and contributing to an agroecological transformation. And with this tool, we wanted to inform and sensitize donors and investors about their value, about the benefits they play in the food system transformation, but also give entrepreneur a tool that helps them to kind of communicate and promote what they're doing for this food system transformation. And then, of course, civil society organizations and policymakers are key actors and can also make use of the tool. Next, please. So what is the difference between the ACT and the BACT? So we developed the ACT actually in 2018 for a study, the Money Flows report, where we analyzed how much money is going into agriculture research and what kind of research. So actually to find out how much money is going to agroecological research. And for that, we used then the 10 elements, FAO elements, because at that time, the 13 principles of agroecology were not developed yet. And there were some drafts of the 10 FAO elements, but they were not approved yet. So because it was in 2018, and we heard from Madeleine, they were approved a bit later on. Next, Samira. Yes, exactly. And ACT, this is how a results diagram looks like. And I think Elian will show a bit more later on, so I don't talk about that. But you see nicely the elements, the FAO elements, and the level of Gleesman. Next. Yes, and the ACT is very useful to assess projects, initiatives, policies, how they contribute to agroecology, how they are aligned with the elements. And the ACT so far has been used by many organizations and has been cited in more than 50 studies, and many methodologies also of donors like IFAD, SDC, their methodologies were derived then from the ACT. So they used ACT as an inspiration, which is really nice to see. Next. Yes, so then I just talked about why we developed the BACT, and then we used the 13 agroecological principles from the HLPE, because by then they were established already. And we kind of entered or introduced more specific questions relevant to enterprises. So that's also a big difference to the ACT. So it's really enterprise specific, but you can also use the BACT if you're not an enterprise and just leave out the tabs that are relevant for enterprises. I will talk about that in a second. Next. So what is an agroecological enterprise? An agroecological enterprise is a business or an enterprise that operations are in line with the agroecological principles and are not actively working against them. So there are red lines we defined in the BIAC that you will see in a minute. And it's really key that they are not touching upon or crossing these red lines. And on the environmental side, they really regenerate instead of degrade soils, biodiversity, climate, water, health. And there is also the socioeconomic dimension, which is very key. So level 4 and 5 by Glissman, so to say. So they contribute these enterprises to a local economy, healthy and local diets, and territorial markets. So we are not talking much about international trade or markets, so really territorial markets and resilience. Next. So how can you access the tool? So it's accessible through our website, the Agroecology info pool. And then under the section of tools, you can access the ACT and the BACT, of course. It's a Google Doc sheet. Next. And it looks like that if you open it, and it's very important to start to save a copy. Otherwise, you cannot work with it. So please save a copy. You're also able to change the tool if you want. You can add questions. So it's really, we wanted to make sure users can adapt the tool, but then please just state that you have adapted the tool so that we are sure for transparency reasons that this is not the original tool anymore. Next. So there are 7 kind of tabs of the tool. One is really information about the enterprise to fill in their vision, mission, where in the food value chain an enterprise is placed, for example. But you can leave that empty if you want. It's just more information for a funder, an investor, for example, to know. It's also about the revenue, for example, how many members you have in the company, but you can also work without this tab. The key tab, kind of the heart of the tool, is tab number 2. These are the 13 principles and questions you need to answer to get the results. Then the screening questions I just touched upon, and the impact questions. So if an enterprise has data on impact, this is the tab to fill it in. And then tab 5 and 6 are the results, and 7 are just additional information. Next, please. Yes. These screening questions that you see here, they're around 12. They have not been developed only by Biovision, but they have been developed last year in Berlin in a workshop of multilateral and bilateral donors. Also NGOs were present, research organizations. So IFAD was there, FAO was there, SDC was there, GIZ was there. So quite a good stakeholder group that approved these red lines. And we took them as they were. So we didn't want to invent new ones. We found it's really important to work with those. And they're also being used in another tool that will be launched in October at the CFS, a funds tracking tool to assess how much money donors, for example, invest in what kind of projects. Next. And this is the heart of the tool. You will have all the 13 principles listed here, with questions and example of the questions to make them more understandable. And you always have the options to rate it directly or indirectly. So for example, if you are a farmer cooperative producing agroecological tomatoes, and you have questions about, do you use green manure, for example, do you substitute synthetic fertilizer? You have a direct influence as this enterprise, so you use this column. But if you're, for example, a restaurant that is sourcing produce from agroecological farmers, you have an indirect influence. So that's kind of the difference. Is your influence sphere direct or indirect? And then this is a big difference between the ACT and the BACT. We have not only yes and no, but also non-applicable. So this NA, which is, for example, animal health. If you are a farmer but not having livestock, so it's not applicable for you, so you don't have to say no, so you are not being punished. So if you put non-applicable, it's just, it doesn't reduce any points. So, or even a processor can score very good if things are just not applicable for the business. So this is one of the biggest difference, I would say, to the ACT, because in the ACT, this very holistic, as we call unicorns, were always very good, that did everything. But in the enterprise dimension, sometimes a processor doesn't have the same influence like a farmer cooperative, because they can do much more on the principle like a processing company, for example. Next. Yes, and here you see how the results are being shown. So you will have an overarching agroecology score, and you have visually the different principles, like, of course, green, you scored very well. Reddish, very dark reddish, of course, you need to improve. That's just the first glance to see how you performed as an enterprise. Next. Then you have the detailed breakdown of all the 13 principles and also an average on these 3 operational principles, as they are called: resource efficiency, strengthening resilience, and secure social equity. And the number of questions that you answered not applicable, you also see in this slide. Next one. And then you will get some suggestions for improvements. So the 3 principles you scored kind of the least will be shown here with some general suggestions how you could improve, things you could maybe add to make your enterprise even more agroecological. And you have the screening questions, important for maybe donors or investors, also for an enterprise. Maybe they're not aware that they're doing something that really crosses some red lines. So you see on the bottom left, this focuses on large-scale intensification of animal production, for example. Next. One of the results is also, it shows how much an enterprise is contributing to the 17 SDGs. Next. And you have a final results visualization where you see the 3 operational principles again. Of course, all the 13 principles with an average score. So the yellow number is an average number. And just for your information, so the Glisman levels are also found here. So recycling input reduction is level 1 and 2. Then the whole strengthening resilience is actually level 3. And then secure social equity is level 4 and 5. So level 5 would be land and natural resource governance and participation. So you find the levels here again, but maybe not so obvious. Next. So I'm almost done, Johanna. And the application of the tool so far. So we have established or kind of launched an agroecology accelerator in Uganda with Shona, our partner organization. And they are using the tool currently to assess which enterprises from Kenya and Uganda will have access and benefit from this accelerator. IFAD is using the BACT in programs in India, Latin America, and Africa. And the research organization or institute, Biovision International, SIAD, is using it in Colombia. So we launched it in end of July only, but we think we already have quite some uptake, which is really nice to see. And now over to you, Samira, for the application.
Yes, thank you very much, Stephanie. My name is Samira. I work for the team of Biovision working on Swiss policy. And we started to use the BACT this spring for one of our projects, which is examples of a sustainable food system. So with this project, we want to highlight initiatives in Switzerland that are already creating a momentum today towards a more sustainable food system. And we have collected more than 200 examples in Switzerland across the whole food supply chain and have selected 18 of these initiatives. And the goal is to give these initiatives more visibility and inspire others. And the BACT was very useful for this for 2 reasons. First, it really helped to select the most agroecological initiatives. And second, the BACT promotes effect-based discourse on how these examples are specifically contributing to a more agroecological food system and how maybe more conventional examples are not able to do so. So as an example, here's Conprobio. Conprobio is a Swiss distribution channel based in the Italian part of Switzerland that distributes organic products. And this is the BACT evaluation of Conprobio. And as an example, as you can see, ControBio really makes a change in the principle of connectivity, because it brings together consumers and producers, and it creates regional value. So this is just a really hands-on example on how the B Act can be used to make agroecology more tangible for the public as well as policymakers or the practitioners themselves. Yes, with these words, I would like to finish our presentation and hand over to Johanna. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Stephanie and Samira, for this excellent introduction. I think it's quite challenging to give an overview of all of what the Act and B Act is, but I think after hearing this, I would know how to use the tool. So thanks a lot for this. Samira didn't mention it, but we have on our website from Biovision also all the beacons of hope from Switzerland evaluated with the B Act. You can find it there too, in case you're interested in more examples. So thanks a lot. And I would actually like to hand over straight to Eliane Steiner, because I'm very curious to hear from her how now they use the ACT tool to evaluate at SWISSAID their programs in the countries and for the overall institutional strategy process. Thanks, Eliane.
Yes, thank you very much, Johanna. Exactly. In my presentation, I'm going to talk more about an application of the tool. So I'm going to walk you through how we used it in our strategy process at SWISSAID. Next, yeah, thank you. So first of all, very briefly, but it's important for you to know how we work at SWISSAID so that you also understand how we did the assessment. So we work in 9 countries in the global south on the topics of agroecology and gender equality. And in each country, we have a coordination office. These offices, they design the projects and also implement them, sometimes themselves and oftentimes with local partner organizations. Next slide, please. So now this year at SWISSAID, we conducted a thorough thematic evaluation in agroecology. This evaluation consists of 3 parts, as you can see here. And today we're going to focus mainly on the first one. This is an ACT self-assessment. In this assessment, we want to evaluate our main agroecological projects, and we assess how these perform with regards to the agroecological transition towards sustainable food system. As it was already also pointed out by Stephanie, in this ACT assessment, we really evaluate the design, not the impact. And this is also why we complement this thematic evaluation with TAPE, which we heard in the first presentation as well, where we analyze the impact of our projects. So we have on one hand a meta-analysis of already completed TAPE evaluations in Colombia and Nicaragua, and currently we are also conducting a full TAPE evaluation in Tanzania. So, but as I said, today we're going to focus on the ACT assessment, and we've heard already a lot today also about the Gleesman and the 10 elements of FAO, which ACT is based on. So because of this structure of ACT, it allows us to really analyze the agroecological character of our projects. And this was then also, of course, our objective. And with this analysis, we also want to find recommendations for our next strategy period. An important point of this assessment was also a capacity building exercise, because ACT is really well structured. It gives example on every element of the different levels of Gleesman as well. So it was a very great tool for us also in a capacity building sense to train our team and also local partner organizations again on these frameworks. So with these objectives, we formulated 2 main questions for our evaluation. So the first one is, in which of the 10 elements of agroecology do our projects perform well, our design perform well, and where could we improve? And also then more to the Gleesman levels, how do our main agroecological projects perform with regards to the agroecological transition towards sustainable food system. Now, before we talk about results, I quickly want to show you how we actually used the tool. As I already mentioned several times, we did it in a self-assessment. That means our country offices, they did the evaluation themselves. So first of all, we introduced the tool in an online workshop where the offices could also ask many questions. And then the country offices were asked to select 1 to 3 projects they would like to evaluate. In every office, we also selected one person that would be responsible for the evaluation, for the moderation, because it's a very long tool. It was very important to us that one person is really responsible and gets really familiar with the tool, and it also turned out that that was very important. The real assessment was then done in a workshop of 2 days, where the whole team came together and analyzed their project designs of the selected projects. In some cases, also partner organizations were invited when they were very important for a project. And so on one day, they assessed the projects, and then on a second day, the teams would analyze the results, already formulate some conclusions and recommendations. In the next step, then, we asked every country team to write a report. So we prepared a template, because as with every evaluation, it's not only important to have the numeric results, but also to have the contextualization of these results. So we really ask every country to explain the results, to explain why there are sometimes shortcomings, that we can really also understand them here from Switzerland, or also other offices from other countries. Then we presented these results, and finally we also synthesized them all in an institutional document where we summarized the different evaluations. Now on this slide, I just quickly want to show you what ACT actually looks like. Maybe you have been wondering already. So ACT is an Excel tool, very similar to BACT. And you can see that for every element of agroecology, there you have different criteria or indicators. And then you rate every indicator if this is something you considered in the design of your project or not. There are 62 criteria in total. And then in every column, you can rate different projects. Yes, now coming to the results. So as I already mentioned, for every country, we have one evaluation report with the assessment of the main agroecological projects. Then, which is very great about the tool, we will see in a second as well, it doesn't only give you the assessment per project, but actually also of different projects together, which we then call the project portfolio. So you have these different levels of assessment. Then we have the contextualization of the results in these reports, and also a management response. Now I'm going to show you the results from Colombia as an example. So here you see the 3 projects we analyzed in Colombia. On the left, these are 2 projects that are more focused on farm level. You can also see that that the green elements, which are Gleesman's level 1, 2, 3, they score generally better than the purple. So it's actually a reflection of the intention of the design is also here in the ACT. What can be, for example, surprising is in the Los Palmitos project, you can see that in responsible governance, we score 0. And it turned out that we actually intended some activities in this element, but we had to cancel them due to the local context. It was not possible to do policy activities there. So they scored 0. And this is again keeping in mind that it's very important, again, the local context, and also that it's not always the goal maybe to score 100% in all the elements, because sometimes it's not possible for good reasons, but it gives you an overview how you score, where you stand, and maybe on a next project what elements you could address. Then the third project, the third project is a seeds project, so that's more on a policy level. And also this you can see as the purple elements score generally higher than the green ones. And then, as I mentioned, we also look at the portfolio. So these three projects together, because our aim is actually on a country level to have a portfolio that covers all the elements and all the levels of the food system transformation. And here we can see that we work in all the elements on a country level. There are some that score very good, for example, the co-creation and sharing of knowledge, which is something that SWISSAID has been doing for a long time. We work a lot in farmer field schools or also participatory research. So this is very nice that we see that now also in our results. Some score less good as responsible governance, which I already explained. Then we synthesized the assessments from all the 9 countries together, which I think is a very nice option you have with this tool, because it's done the same way in all the countries. So you can also summarize the different assessments together. So we had 21 projects in total, which we summarized here, and you can see the institutional level result in this spider. And again, we can see that we work in all the elements on all the different levels. Again, responsible governance scores the least, which is actually not a surprise. It's also the one that's on oftentimes a very high level, so it's quite difficult to tackle. Oftentimes we also work in local contexts that don't allow us so much to work in this. But it really gives us an overview where we stand, where we already work good, and yes, where we should or could improve. Then we also grouped the results together in programs. So we have one program that's called Crops for HD, which is in Africa and Asia. And this is really a food system level project, which was designed to work on different levels. So we have what we call push, pull, and policy. So we really tackle to work on the production side with the farmers, then also on the market side and on the policy level. And this we can see here also in the results of the ACT assessment, that it's really that all the elements score almost the same. So there are some projects where we have a more where you have more scores in all the projects. So with these results, we come to the recommendations. So on a country level, we will support the country levels now to address the shortcomings specific to their countries. It's very important to see that there are local contexts that don't allow the full score in all the elements, as I already mentioned several times. But it's really important to have this country level baseline now, where we can see where we're working, and then as we are using it now on the beginning of a new strategic period, we can see in 4 years or something like that, if we repeat the assessment, if we could address some shortcomings or not. So it's a really great tool to have this overview where we stand. Then on an institutional level, actually the same. We want to tackle these higher levels of food system transformation in the next period, so level 3, 4, and 5. And the next point is also very important. Samira, if you can go one more, thank you. So we have some examples where we score very good in these elements, for example, synergies or circular and solidarity economy. And now we can really foster knowledge exchange. So we see where we have good examples, and now we can really make knowledge exchanges from these good examples to other programs or countries. Yes, I would also like to give you some insights and some feedback from our countries and from ourselves on the tool. So the first one is a very positive one. It was really said oftentimes, Samira, if you can go one more. Why are we using ACT only now? So the tool is really appreciated by our country offices and the partners because it gives this overview because of these indicators that are grouped into the 10 elements and also different levels of Gliessmann. The country teams could really go through them, get examples on them. So it's really this capacity building aspect that was highly valued by the teams. Then it's a useful tool to establish a baseline to see where you stand as an organization, what your projects perform well, where you have shortcomings, and where you could improve. Then some more critical factors. Some of the indicators were a bit hard for our country offices to understand sometimes. And also, it's not always easy to be so self-critical with yourself in a self-assessment. So we are aware that our results are also a bit biased because of subjectivity. But I guess that's true for many evaluations. And then it was also quite hard for our teams to understand that we analyze the design and not the impact. So I think it was one of the first times for many people to analyzing a design of a project and not the impact, which needed a lot of convincing that we should still do this. So I'm almost done. I just want to add again with this slide that we saw at the beginning already that we value ACT very much as a tool to analyze this design. So it's more a strategic tool as well for us internally at SWISSAID. And we think that in combination with other tools like TAPE that evaluate the impact, it's a really great tool that can really give you information on your work and on your standpoint. Yes, sorry. So yes, with this, thank you very much. Thank you, Samira, for clicking through the presentation, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you a lot, Eliane, for sharing all these insights. Also specifying how you used the ACT tool, not only to evaluate, self-evaluate the projects, but then also really on a country program level and how this was feeding into institutional developments within SWISSAID. And just on a side note, I was part of a similar process at HEG, so I can really mirror a lot of the points that you raised, also with regards, for instance, of partner organizations raising the importance of the tool and emphasizing why we start using this tool so late. So thank you a lot. Very crucial insights. And now I would really like to move on to the part where we can ask questions to all the speakers, and then also have a more general discussion. But let's maybe first really start with questions of clarification. If you have questions of understandings that are quite specific to any of the presenters, please feel free to raise your virtual hand. I will see if I can, yes, I hope I can see everybody. And if I'm not picking you and there's a silence, then you may feel free to just unmute yourself and talk. Feel free to be proactive too. And let's try to start with questions of clarification. If there are none coming up, because I'm not seeing any hands yet, maybe a quite stupid question for me to start off with. from what I heard on the tape tool was from Lutz that the tape tool is really more used by, let's say, people evaluating the effects or outcomes from other projects. And what I heard now from Eliane, for instance, or Stephanie and Samira was that the ACT tool was being used by people evaluating their own, be it an enterprise or project or program. So maybe was that because of the focus of your presentation, or would you think there's a difference in use in the tools in this sense? Just to clarify, can each tool be used for own evaluation and external assessment, or is it useful only for one setting? And please just feel free to speak, all the speakers. So Lutz.
No, I think you can use tape also for your own evaluation. However, I think to a large degree, you might need assistance with that. So what we usually do when we do these surveys with the farm households, that we provide feedback on what the current assessment was, so that actually the farm households can also do something with that. So in the end, it's not just by yourself, but you may have to sort of get some advice, etc.
Stephanie?
Yes, and about the ACT. So when we developed the ACT, the goal was to assess research projects not implemented by Biovision. So it was not a self-assessment. But with the BACT, we highly suggest that the results would then be discussed with the entrepreneurs, because mostly in small enterprises, you don't have such good documentation online available. So it's then maybe the evaluation is or kind of the assessment is based on some limited information you have. So you can do kind of an external assessment, but we suggest you discuss this then with really the focal points, the entrepreneurs themselves, to be fair on their assessment, because many information you might not have. But it's both possible, self-assessment or external assessment.
Thanks a lot. Isabel, I'm seeing your hand raised.
Yeah, sorry, I somehow can't figure out how to find the little hand that's normally there. So I'm doing it the old-fashioned way. Thank you very much for the introduction. It was really interesting to hear. I have two questions on ACT probably. So I was wondering if you would say it can also be used for project design. Because as Eliana mentioned, that it was very helpful for partner organizations also to get a better understanding about the agroecological ecological principles behind it. So maybe that would be useful. And then I was also wondering if Biovision is offering kind of an introduction into the tool. Like, is there an online session that people can attend? Yeah, so that would be interesting to hear.
Well, just briefly answer on the first question, and then I leave it to somebody from Biovision. So our partner organization, they didn't use it yet, but they all said that they will definitely use it for a next project design. Not really to fill it in already, but more to have on by the side, and to have. It's not like a checklist, but to have the elements already there. It's this list is very useful for them, because the frameworks are sometimes a bit too up in the air. So to have these indicators with example can be very helpful for them. But I think you have to be careful that you really don't use it as a checklist, because it's not the goal that every project has every element. So it can be as a help, I guess.
Yes, I think I have nothing to add what Elian said, just that for the BACT, it's actually the same. IFAD is using it in two ways, for example, one in the design of business plans. So they check the BACT and they get inspired what maybe an enterprise could add or activities they could do. Of course, it's not always possible that a processor does everything, but it gives some inspiration, and then assessing already existing enterprises. So it's like both possible. And yes, we do at the moment actually more capacity building on the BACT because that's now the newest tool, but we could also still go back and do trainings on the ACT, or maybe SWISSAID does trainings anyways, or I don't know, we would need to check, but we can still, of course, offer that and see how we can collaborate on that.
Thanks a lot. So I'm seeing a hand raised by Shailesh. Sorry, I hope I pronounced your name right.
Yeah, thanks, Joanna. I think very interesting presentations, and it was quite informative as well. I'm basically from a consulting organization in India, in Telecap, and in partnership with GIZ, last year we, modified, or not modified, but basically used the tape tool along with the ACT to make it more context specific for a particular state. Now that state is also quite big. If you look at other countries in India, and one of the question which Isabel asked about whether projects could be assessed on that, and that is exactly what we did later on. The tool was designed or modified for that particular context. And in India, there are many schemes. So the government runs various agriculture schemes, and under one of these schemes, agroecology was mentioned, but no one knew how do they integrate agroecology elements into their detailed project reports. So the NGOs were preparing these DPRs, or detailed project reports, for getting funding from this particular scheme. And a workshop was organized to make them understand the tool, how they can use this tool for assessing the projects which were already developed, to see how much alignment is there. And second is that if they are designing new projects, then how can they use these elements? And I was quite surprised to see Ilian's presentation, where she was talking about the Excel sheet that was given. And exactly, same Excel sheet we used, and people were able to understand that, what kind of elements that they need to take. And of course, there is a lot of subjectivity built into it. The only thing which I would like to add in this is that we tried introducing objectivity by putting in two elements. So these two elements were ex situ and in situ use of resources. And second was whether it was nature-based solutions or synthetic solutions which were used. And these on these two parameters, under all the 13 elements of ACT tool, we tried to bring in some objectivity to that. So if the solutions were coming from the farm itself, or they were coming from the same landscape, they were fetching more marks than if it was coming from outside the landscape, from the market far away. And second thing is that if the farm, because it is an integrated agricultural system, including livestock management and agriculture, so if the, let's say manure is coming from the same system, which is a nature-based solution for fertility enhancement, then it was fetching more marks. So including such kind of maybe objective elements, we found that it was useful. Sorry for taking more time.
No, thanks a lot. I think it's very valuable also if participants here share their experience and their insights that they gained when using the tools. And I think to some degree it also speaks to an exchange that we're already having here in the chat, which is super interesting. So we are having people both discussing here in live, and meanwhile simultaneously in the chat. So there was this question on the tape and it being very extensive, but also adaptable to the local context. And so to share experiences on how that was adopted to the context, but also maybe challenges related to this. And so Lutz already shared some insights there in the chat. Of course, thank you, Lutz, for offering also to share more bilaterally if people have questions on this, but maybe you would also like to react briefly on it for everybody to hear.
Sure, I can say a few thoughts. I mean, in the end, we really think that tape has the advantage to be adapted to the local context or to specific countries, because in some system, or even to projects, because sometimes some questions you basically don't need to answer, or you can answer a priori, and others you may want to add because you want to address specific situations. And that flexibility, I think, is amazing to have. It's good then to do the countrywide assessment with that, but of course it also brings a little bit of difficulties then to compare that to other countries. Nevertheless, I mean, on the step 1, you can always achieve that. The step 2 then brings the necessary detail, and it really helps to sort of really also sort of tailor potential interventions or changes to drive agroecological transformation in the end.
Thanks a lot. So I'm seeing one more hand from Julian.
Yeah, thank you. I hope you can hear me. Somehow the BX and X tool kind of reminded me to the tools used in the economy for the common good. I don't know if you're familiar with this. There's also a scheme where you try to measure certain parts of the economy and how they enhance the common good. And I was wondering, I wanted to ask if there might be synergy or a need to join forces between those kind of movements, and if they are might even be somehow compatible with each other.
Thanks, Julian. I think it was understandable, but not quite so easy. But I could see some of my colleagues react, so I hand over.
But unfortunately not with a great response, because I unfortunately don't know this other tool you mentioned. So I don't know how good we can use synergies and combine the two tools. But if you could share some links, that would be great, because we always want to learn more about other tools and how we could combine and create synergies.
Madeleine?
Yeah, I also have a question, if you allow me. So I have a question to Lutz, because he mentioned at the very end the possibility that he adds a climate dimension to the FAO tape. This is something that in our internal revision of our Swiss agriculture policy with the agroecological principles, we heard many colleagues also at FOAG saying, okay, agroecology, the 13 principles, good, okay, but some dimensions are missing, and one important one was climate, exactly what Lutz said. So I was wondering if he could give us some more maybe explanation on how this will be done, what thoughts are put in there, and maybe also by when.
Thanks, Madeleine, for putting me on the spot here. So yeah, I mean, when we started to work with tape, I also had the feeling that a climate indicator would be very useful. But historically, sometimes there's different communities, the climate smart agriculture community and the agroecology community, and one has to be a bit careful. We're trying to build a bridge at the moment, because from the Kenya work, we do have actually both climate smart agriculture assessments from the same farms, then the agroecology assessments. So what we're trying to do at the moment, link these two data sets and surveys, etc., and hopefully show that the more agroecological you are, also the more climate friendly, or let's say you have a mitigation co-benefit, and possibly, I mean, you likely have an adaptation benefit as well. But we really try to prove that with some robust evidence, basically, from Kenya. And we're trying to do the same thing, basically, in the next resource project here in Switzerland, because at the moment, yeah, unfortunately, the surveys are usually not always merged. And I think we can come up with something really robust in the end, in the next, let's say, probably 2 years or something. Hopefully earlier. We're working on that.
Thanks a lot for sharing, Lutz. I'm not seeing any other hands, so I'm using my role as a moderator to also ask a question. So I appreciated this question, but maybe if we turn it around, it's also quite interesting to think about, do we have any sort of red flags, or moving on, do we have any sort of minimum criteria or threshold, whereas we start to speak of an agroecological project or enterprise or program or and so on. Because I mean, coming back to this question that we just had, we could have some sort of climate smart agriculture measures without that yet quite being what we would expect to happen in an agroecological farming system. For instance, just, you know, it could be the same, but it could also be different. So reason why I'm asking, and I heard red flags in the ACT and BACT tool. So I would like to ask back to all speakers, for both tools, are there red flags? And for both tools, do you have sort of minimum criteria or baseline? Whereas as of there, you start to speak of agroecology. And if not, maybe also the reasons behind, or what could be considered when having these discussions about minimum criteria. Who would like to start? I'm seeing Lutz ready. Cool.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Johanna. I think it's not necessarily a threshold or something, and I tried to explain it at the beginning with that pie chart, which wasn't probably shown very well. But in the end, you're on a sort of a pathway to ecological transformation, and once you start to do an assessment, you have sort of your baseline there and where you're standing. And from the individual scores, what we basically think is that as soon as you're above 50, you're really on the pathway of ecological transformation. Below that, you're starting to get there. But in the end, anything higher than 50% then would sort of bring you there. And I think it's not, you can't just put it like, oh, this is all bad or this is all good. It's really sort of the process.
Yeah, maybe I can add, I fully support and second what Lutz mentioned. I think for us, it's also level 1 and 2 is not agroecological yet. So you really need to reach level 3, but even only reaching level 3 is not enough. So, but we have not a threshold integrated due to many reasons in both tools, but we have these red flags only in the BACT, actually, not in the ACT, which we thought is important to have. We could also add it into the ACT. And it's really important. I didn't mention it in the presentation, but we need to be careful with these numbers, right? It's just really, it's a pathway. It shows the alignment. It shows kind of in which direction an enterprise is moving, or where an enterprise maybe is very strong when we talk about agroecological, but we need to be careful not to compare too strongly and say, this one is not good yet and this one is good. I think the way there, you know, to develop this assessment, to talk to each other, also to sensitize donors, investors about what it is, how an agroecological enterprise could look like, is much more important than the actual results. So we need to be also careful how we talk about these results. It's not, and it's subjectivity in there for sure, right? And we cannot eliminate that. We are all humans, right? We are biased if we assess our own projects, that's clear. But it's really more, these tools help to, yeah, inform, sensitize, to bring more light into this complex topic of what is agroecology. So we need to be careful not to just, yeah, be then too strict with the numbers. And so that's also with the thresholds. They were always pro, but also strong cons for having thresholds. So that's why we have the red lines, and I think they are very important.
And maybe adding from my side on this, not on the topic of threshold, but on the topic of control group. So as I mentioned, we are now also doing a full tape evaluation in Tanzania, and there on a project of ours. And there it was the idea also a bit from donors, but also from us to have a control group. So to see our project beneficiaries and then a control group. But this is also something that's extremely difficult because the comparison between different farms is extremely difficult because there are so many things that are different between the farms that you then just comparing the impact, for example, and referring that to agroecology, that's very dangerous. So I think, as Lutz already mentioned, it can be very useful to see over time on the same household, but comparing between households or farms is something that has to be done with a lot of caution. So yeah, the numbers really have to be taken with a lot of caution.
Thanks a lot. I don't know if anybody would like to still add something on this, or if there are additional questions or points of discussion you'd like to raise. Yes, Madeleine.
Yeah, maybe you just allow me to do here a little pledge for the Agroecology Coalition, because we had this same discussion actually in the Agroecology Coalition. You might know this coalition. It has emerged from the UN Food Systems Summit, and it really tries to group all the different stakeholders that advocate for agroecology, that are in research, in policy, in investments, and so on. And please, for those who are not already a member of the Agroecology Coalition, please have a look at the website and also join us. So we had also this discussion, who is actually allowed to join the Agroecology Coalition, by what level or what elements needs to be implemented so that you can join the coalition. What we said is that we need to be somehow committed to the fulfillment of all the agroecological principles. I think that's something that is very important. And I mean, when we look at the Swiss Federal Office for Agriculture, we are also part of the coalition. We are not yet fulfilling all the 13 principles, but we are committed to go there. And I think one important thing is, and that's also that builds on what Lutz said, I think it's a journey, and all the stakeholders can join at whatever level they are ready to join, but all of them need to reach to level 5. They need to want to go to level 5. And I think it's also important to say that we need all stakeholders on board to make this food systems transformation happening. And that's where I would really pledge that we go in the direction of commitment and awareness, what it means to implement all these 13 agroecological principles.
Thanks a lot, Madeleine. Very interesting, and thanks for sharing. And of course, a very important pledge that I can only agree with. I'm still checking if, thanks, Stephanie also shared the link to the Agroecology Coalition. But I think there are no other. Yes, and Julian also shared the link to the Economy for the Common Good. I am not seeing any other hands or questions. Maybe also the speakers would like to add on something that one of their peers raised before, or they also have points they would like us to discuss. Please also feel free. No. Yes, I see one more hand.
Yeah, so thank you so much for the introduction to these different assessments. And also it's part of the previous discussions. And I was wondering on how, like in your experience, to reduce the bias on your evaluations. because I think it's a big kind of like challenge in a qualitative study, that's there always like a bias because sometimes we don't have this exact measurements. So yeah, in your experience, how you try to reduce your bias and also prevent like a really good data sets. Yeah, that's my question.
So maybe I can come in here. So what we did with the money flows report is that we always had 2 people analyzing the same projects to make, and then to compare if the assessments or the results were similar, and then discussing where they were not similar. And the same we have now with the BACT in the accelerator. We have like different consultants assessing these 30 enterprises, and we exchange regularly and see how we would rate different kind of complex questions or things that are not clear. So I think this peer-to-peer check, this sounding board is good. So if just only one person looks at something, it could be even more dangerous than if at least 2 people or a group is checking just some aspects that are a bit difficult.
Others would like to jump in and also complement, maybe Lutz, how you deal with this with the tape tool?
We have a pretty similar approach. I mean, what we ensure is that when we do the surveys, that we all sort of train the people who are going to the field the same way, or we just have 1 or 2 persons going together, and it's always the same. And I think it's both, it's qualitative and quantitative. And I mean, we're definitely doing better on the quantitative because we have these long-term plausibility tests on where we can really see on whether something makes sense or not. But it's all about the combination. And I think no matter which survey tool you're using, I think to familiarize the people who do the surveys with the content and how things are done is absolutely key, training, etc. And even when we exchanged recently at the end of April with everybody at FAO, there were a lot of sort of NGOs or whatever who use tape, but they missed the training mainly because of the pandemic, etc. And then you suddenly getting quite a large spread in your information. But I think that's getting better, and thus also more harmonizable and comparable.
Thanks a lot. So the importance of training, and maybe also of key people who both have this training but also coordinate the process. I think Eliane, you also mentioned something in this regard in your experience at SWISSAID. Maybe you want to complement?
Yes, so in our ACT assessment, we knew that there would be a bias, but because it was more an internal use, we didn't correct too much for this. But yes, we really made sure that we had 1 person responsible per country for the assessment, and these would then also be the people that are that got the most training from us, let's say. What we also did was this presentation of the results, and there afterwards there was also some correction. So there as we exchanged the results, some offices realized that they were maybe too strict with the assessment compared to others, and so there was kind of a correction afterwards. But as I said, it's for internal use in this way, so there we didn't correct too much.
And maybe just can I add 1 sentence, Johanna? What we realized is also that level 4 and 5, there we had most of the questions coming up by people assessing, because the others more on farm level, it's quite straightforward, I would say. Do you use this or not? But the question, do you engage in policy spheres? Then the question, could they do, or is it not applicable because they cannot? So there we realized it's a lot of questions and complexity comes, and which is natural, right? Level 4 and 5. But at the same time, these are key levels. So I think we just need to exchange and discuss and have the common understanding. But helps the people also to see what they could do on these levels, because most of the time it's not really clear that they could engage in these policy multi-stakeholder platforms, for example, that they even exist in these countries.
Thanks for adding this very important point. I think, like you're saying, the tools are not only a way for evaluating more or less objectively and where a project or an actor stands, but really also enabling one to see where one maybe hasn't been active until now, but it could actually be a field of activity, right? So it's also crucial to have it as a reflective tool in this sense. I am not seeing any more hands. So I would really like to thank everybody for sharing their experiences. I think we have learned many crucial insights. Like Madeleine said before, it's crucial that we are all on this path together and that we are all seeking this transformation. And I think what all the presentations and the discussion afterwards also showed very clearly was that we cannot use these tools for a very objective way of saying, oh, you're agroecological and you're not. But it's really to all be on the path, have this vision, and then also move forward and see where maybe points are that haven't been addressed until now, but that needs to be addressed. And do this in a way that is very context specific. So this was also important point raised during the discussion, right? That the tools and how they're used may also differ from country to country, and that it is again in an interaction amongst actors in that setting that we need to clarify what is sort of where do we start and to what do we move and how are we aligning this process to what we wish to do. So thanks a lot. So I was just sharing what I took away from this exchange. I would like to invite everybody, if you wish to share 5 to 7 words, keywords, or half a sentence, what is your next step on measuring agroecology? Because I always like to move out of an event and also have a specific action in mind, something that I can actively do. For instance, personally, I can also share more information in my network on the experience that organizations have, like SWISSAID, on evaluating their own programs, country programs, and the institutions. I think there we can do concrete steps too. So you can please feel free to share your next steps. Again, to recall, because this was asked several times, if there is a recording of the event. So yes, we did record the event. We will share it on the YouTube channel of Agroecology Works. The link is in the chat as well. We will not share, in addition with all participants, the slides by the speakers, because we believe that you can use the video to fast forward and watch 5 times those parts that you found most interesting. We'd like to ask you to take 2 minutes at the end of these events to evaluate. This would be super helpful for us also to further improve our events. And then, next slide, please. Thank you. Also to recall that this event on measuring agroecology within the Days of Agroecology is the first but not the last event on measuring agroecology. So there is one event on how to measure agroecology, testing a new approach in Northern Laos, focusing on participatory methods by the Center for Development and Environment on the 16th of October. This is also an online event. And then there is an event on the 18th of October, also online, this one in German, die wahren Leistungen der Bauernhöfe wertschätzen by the Biostiftung Schweiz, together with Regionalwertleistungen. So this is on how we can evaluate the work done and performed on the diverse farms and towards a diversified and sustainable farming system. And there are many more really fascinating events as part of the Days of Agroecology, so please check out the website for more information there. Next slide, please. So with this, I really want to thank you all for your active participation. A big thanks to all the speakers for sharing your insights and your experiences, and for all the participants to really be here, ask questions. I hope that this is not the end of the discussion, so to speak, but really just one step in our continuous exchange, and that you can also feel free now that we've spoken to each other online. If there are questions coming up, one of the participants heard something super interesting from one of the speakers that we can exchange more in depth. So thanks a lot. And I hope to see many of you again at one of the occasions of these Days of Agroecology.